This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this honorable chamber was debating the second reading of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Bill 2020. To this we shall return. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I shall try to do this as quickly, but as meaningfully as I can. I believe that all of us here and most people outside would welcome the passage in this House of any legislation that addresses properly the ugly feature of corruption in our society, in our economy, in our politics, and does that in a very meaningful and effective way. And so I don't know that I stand to be critical in a negative way of the legislation, but I want to start at this particular point where I make reference to a thought that the former honorable member of this House for the St. Thomas constituency and a former Attorney General in the Cabinet of Barbados and Chief Justice of this country shared a thought which he shared, that legislation can provide, if it is properly structured, the infrastructure that gives a regulatory framework to whatever it is we want to create. But the final piece of the puzzle with respect to legislation which is intended to be anti-corruption, the final piece in the puzzle is the existence of personal integrity in politicians, in public servants, in public officials, and of course, persons in the private sector. The thoughts of Sir David Simmons. One can agree easily with that. And whereas we do have to critique the legislation, I am more often given to a focus as to how people perform in the context of the existence of that legislation or the absence of it, and the level of integrity that attaches to the processes that we create and the institutions which are supposed to be products of that legislation in pursuit of the objectives nobly underlined, and many of them today by the Honorable Attorney General. Now, we have to recognize, of course, the potential threat to our practice of democracy, our democratic systems, or democratic culture. And that is perhaps one of the first bases from which we start when we start to think of, contemplate, start to formulate anti-corruption legislation. What is a potential threat to our system of governance that we want to ward off? We must, of course, identify the dynamics which will diminish, erode the measure of institutional integrity to which the country aspires, because to a large extent democracy is about the effective and proper wholesome functioning of institutions. And if that is not in place, and if that is not a practice which comes normally, most people lose a sense of confidence in those institutions. When those institutions are no longer credible, then our system goes awry, our culture is in trouble, our people suffer, country declines. So we have to be careful about identifying those threats and fortifying the kind of architecture that will work against those threats, but would also work towards the building of something substantial upon which we can platform whatever it is we're seeking to call into being in a positive way with reference to nation building. I know that the Honorable Attorney General promised that in the not too distant future, we can anticipate whistleblower legislation to come to the Parliament of Barbados. Of course, we wait with almost bated breath for that. We want to anticipate in a positive way it's coming because we believe that it is critical if we are going to properly construct an architecture of substance and of force, and one which has efficacy. Then, of course, we have to make sure that other important strands of legislation are also in place. And the whistleblower, where what is called protected disclosure legislation in other places, even in the Caribbean, protected disclosure legislation is put in place. We are very much a part of a culture where things fall off the back of trucks, especially trucks traveling by route of Bay Street, or used to be Bay Street. And yet we find it so difficult. I know Bay Street, not George Street. The culture is that things fall off trucks heading through Bay Street. And it is so easy for things to fall off the truck. It means that people are aware of what is happening and want to get the warnings out and put the public spotlight on what is happening. But we come with some measure of difficulty to the business of putting in place protected disclosure, whistleblower legislation, and such that carries with it significant incentives which will ensure that people are willing to participate, not disinclined to do so, and a sufficient prohibition that when people blow the whistle and people bring things to the public eye, the public attention, the attention of the authorities, they're not made to be victimized and made to suffer as a result of their actions in the interests of the wider. So we look forward to that legislation coming down the road for us in not too distant future. Akin to that, we would expect, I did not hear the Honorable Member for St. Joseph make reference to election financing, political party financing, but I believe that that is also, or should be, critically a part of that architecture which works against the practice of corruption in Barbados. We have to find the proper means of financing political parties, and I don't even want to dwell too long on that because it upsets me a bit, and not for the reasons that some people might think. We have to find a proper way of financing. Were he our financier, we would have been in serious straits, not only now, but previously as well. But we need to have a party financing, and we need to have proper election financing. People need to be fully dissuaded from the view that you can support a political party with the absolute assurance that if they win and become the government, then it is your day to enjoy the sweets to the exclusion of others, and that because they have won with your support, you have a muscular arm around their necks, and you choose when they breathe or otherwise, and when they act, they must act in your interest. People need to be dissuaded from that type of belief. So we need electoral financing. I didn't hear that mentioned as part of the suite of legislation which has come in, and again, I repeat, we need that. We need that. We need that, especially now. I have to tell you, the numerical composition or configuration of this parliament is an indicative factor in one coming to a conclusion as to the way we need that now, because I believe the imbalance that obtains in this parliament has to be corrected, and the imbalance that seemingly obtains in Barbadian political context today needs to be addressed. The business of election financing and party financing can go ways towards helping us to ensure that there is a proper balance obtaining here. So I hope that that perhaps will be and can be a part of the suite of legislation which is to come down in a few months. We've talked a lot about the business of contracts and the culture that obtains again around the award of contracts in Barbados, some with some measure of scrutiny, others without any scrutiny at all, some in the context of the regularly existing frames, some outside of that, just outside of that. And these are things which can be manipulated. You just have to be a few dollars off mark to make it go the way you want it to go and to operate outside the intended frame of the legislation. The business of a contractor general as a position and the legislation that would give support to that is another element that is always considered when a nation state, to the extent that we are developed, is serious about building out its infrastructure's architecture against corruption, then those things are significantly included. And of course, access to information, freedom of information. We talked about these things so many times, and I mentioned them again today only because in assuring us that a suite of legislation will shortly come once he has his way, the Attorney General, Honorable Attorney General, did not identify specifically for us some of these elements, and I do sincerely hope that they form part of that which is to come. Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned about the independence of agencies. This legislation seeks to establish an anti-corruption agency. We have to be concerned about the level or measure of independence attaching to agencies and the resources accorded these agencies in the context of the legislation which we bring here. Many times, those institutional entities that we create fall prey to either the political process or some other processes which are mighty and which do not necessarily serve to enforce the ends for which the entities themselves have been created. Now, in Clause 3 of this bill, Mr. Speaker, Part 2, in Clause 3, the principal objects, the first object stated is to establish an agency which will have sufficient operational independence and autonomy and be dedicated to combating corruption and terrorism in collaboration with other strategic partners, etc. So the emphasis there, and it is a primary one, at least it is in the bill. But many times, stipulations make their way into the documentary context, but in the operational aspects of the life of those entities, we don't see it play out. So my concern would be that the agency which we seek to establish does, in fact, not only in word, but in deed as well, have a sufficiency of operational independence and autonomy that it can properly serve the ends for which it is intended. In Clause 13 of in Clause 13, which is on page 17, under head Ministerial Direction, subject, that is subsection 1 of Clause 13, section 1 of Clause 13, subject to the provision of this Act, the Minister may, after consultation with the Director General, give to the Director General such policy directions relating to the exercise of his functions as appear to the Minister to be in public interest. Now, that is wording which is acceptable. That is wording which is all right in the context of the document, but sometimes there's a gray area around this business of the phrasing which is always used, and that is, may give to the Director General, that is the Minister, has the power to give to the Director General such policy directions relating to the functions of his office as may be considered prudent and necessary. Now, in the hands of a person not properly disposed, that which is intended to serve our better interests as a country can be corrupted such that the communications, the directions between or coming from the Minister of the day and the Director General in this case may be such as narrow interests may be served and not necessarily the wider national interests. And we want to be clear as to the fact that it is policy directives and not operational instructions can be given. It has not been unknown that ministers, under guise of this, use it to cross the boundary, step on the crease, and hold fairly significant sway over public functionaries in this capacity, in a capacity such as this, and it affects the office, it affects the entity. So I would have to register some of those concerns. Also, if we're talking about the business of independence of the entity, of the office, I recognize that not too long ago, I think it was the Honorable Attorney General who led the presentation of this legislation. I might be wrong. Maybe it was your member of Christchurch, East Central, but it had to do with the position of the Central Bank Board and the position of the governor of the Central Bank, and it was thought prudent in pursuit of the objective of ensuring that the governor of the Central Bank was not a creature of the Minister of Finance, wholly and solely owned by him, was not an operating subsidiary of the Minister of Finance. The tenure of service for the governor of the Central Bank was extended beyond the limit of a political cycle to move to 6 years. And it was specifically stated then that we want to make sure the governor is appointed for 6 years so that the political administration of the day could not abuse its power and be rid of him if they were at odds with what he was doing. All right, case where it's a lady, what she was doing. So the length of that tenure was set outside the parameters of the 5-year cycle of the administration, made to be 6 years. But this one here, according to clause 14, is a period of 3 years, and the person is eligible for reappointment. Now, the Honorable Member St. Joseph did stress that there are inbuilt mechanisms with respect to removal of that functionary, and that it is not easy so to remove that functionary by dint of political whims and fancies. And therefore, they wanted to strengthen that aspect of the legislation. But I question why only 3 years, not 6 years, and maybe some sound reason for it. If so, maybe that could be shared with us by somebody from the other side. Now, the other issue has to do with the funds of the agency, and that is in clause 24. Funds and resource agency shall consist of such funds as may be appropriated for the purposes of the agency by the Parliament of Barbados. This is standard. This is standard. But there has to be a process by which those requests for funds get to the Parliament. And I know that there is an independence attaching to, in a limited way, to the process by which, for instance, the vote for the office of the Auditor General passes by Parliament as part of the estimates, which we're due to debate. And the question would be the method by which, the process under which the funds requested for the operation of this entity will find its way into the Parliament. And if before it gets here, it becomes overly subject to the scrutiny of the political directorate or the office of the Ministry of Finance to such an extent that some measure of independence, some measure of autonomy with respect to functioning and resources is lost. That would be of some concern, Mr. Speaker, to myself. Now, corruption comes in many forms. One might say many shapes and even sizes. But corruption expresses itself in various ways, some easily seen, some not quite so visible. And whereas an individual from the world of private business may find it his business or her business in these days to approach a public servant or a political principal and offer a gift in return for some lenience, some favor, and that becomes an obvious act of corruption. There's some acts which are not so obvious. if you were a government, let's say you're the Minister of Public Works, and you know very well that the cabinet intends in a short while from now to consider and approve a project or a policy position. Let's say a new brand highway will pass through X district and into Y region and will occasion the passage of much traffic and will occasion the opening up of economic activity in our region. If you are a minister, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you aspire to be that. If you're a minister, Mr. Speaker, and you know the cabinet is going to go down that road, it may very well be, if you're disposed to being corrupt, which you absolutely are not, Mr. Speaker, you may want to say to a business friend who is looking to open up a restaurant somewhere that this may be a very good location. There's a large parcel of land along here. Perhaps it's owned by government, which the government will easily sell. But this highway is going to pass through here, and economic activity is going to be created in significant ways. And Mr. Speaker, my saying that to you as a minister puts you in a position of some significant advantage, because you can then move in here and build your restaurant in anticipation of that project coming through there and the activity and the passage of numbers that will attend that economic activity. And it could be a restaurant, it could be any form of business, depending on what you're into and what the coming roadway is likely to create for you. But you know it. Others who are interested in the same type of enterprise don't know it, because you have told your friend, or you have told a relative, an in-law, and so they're properly positioned to build a big spanking new restaurant, or a big hardware store, or a big supermarket, a very strategic location. That's corruption too, not so easily seen, because nobody knew when you whispered to your friend, hey, a big housing development project is coming up here. This is where you need to set your business, because you stand substantially to benefit from its presence. Nobody knows you've done that as corruption, not so easily seen. That is the one that comes in the dead of night, figuratively speaking. The one that comes after dark, the one that walks in the shadows. But it is corruption, nevertheless. It's insider information. That's what it is called in other circles, dealing with stock and other forms of capital. Insider trading. And I'll be concerned about that, because this region suggests many examples around which this question has arisen. And Barbados is not so innocent anymore, has not been for the last maybe 30 years with respect to these things, or maybe it goes back further than that. And we have seen people locating themselves in certain places, and you wonder until you realize. And I am serious about that. Mr. Speaker, you take, for instance, this coming marijuana industry that we're looking to develop. Hey, I hear the chief executive officer, I think that's the designation, saying already there are Barbadians who have entered the field and acquired licenses to operate. I don't know who they are. I wish we would be told, or could be told, if there is not prohibitive legislation with respect to that. But who are those Barbadians who are already up front and benefiting from an early start in the marijuana industry in Barbados? Who are they? And have they had any advantage given to them by early information being passed to them as to what this parliament would do? That's a very serious question. I'm not being facetious. I'm not even being malicious. I am being true to my responsibility here. I'm raising the question because there are a lot of queries being raised about the marijuana industry in Barbados and the extent to which Barbadians are likely to benefit. And therefore, I think it is a legitimate question as to raise in the interest of Barbadians, and that's why information and access to information becomes critically an important
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify, the honorable member for St. Michael West
What was the point of order?
is misleading the House. Is
I'm
misleading the
not
House.
determining, I'm just asking.
No licenses have been issued to date by the Barbados Medicinal Cannabis Licensing Authority.
Continue, honorable member.
Well, let me rephrase. Because I was sure I heard that licenses had been issued. But if I am mistaken in what I think I heard, I take that back. But let me say that if and when licenses are issued, it would be good if we could get to know to whom they have been issued. And it would be good to us to get to know that, because perhaps it helps us to free ourselves of any view that anybody would have been given a significant advantage and head start because they were aware of where government was going. Now, I happen to know that the corporate entity around this business was put in place even before the legislation was passed in this parliament. Now, that is a fact. If the Honorable Minister of Agriculture wants to challenge on that one, he can as well, and if I'm wrong, I would take that back too. But I know that we had a corporate entity registered with respect to the business of the marijuana industry in Barbados before the legislation even came and was passed in the parliament. It was still being discussed in the public arena in Barbados. So when I hear officials related to this entity say to us today that licenses have been issued, I thought that's what I heard. Then I have to ask, has anybody, whether it's Barbadian, whether it be black or white, or any other shade or hue, has anybody been given an upfront advantage on others because they had prior knowledge as to what was coming down? I do have some concerns about that. You don't think that these things are far-fetched and beyond the pale? This Parliament of Barbados has been made to come face-to-face with some. I heard the Honorable Member for St. Andrew question, for instance, the use of land just at the bottom of Orange Hill, which was slated for housing. It is now occupied by a big sprawling restaurant. Now, I don't know about those things. I don't know about the details. I'm just being illustrative here. And I'm saying that I heard the Honorable Member for St. Andrew, who is not now with us in his seat, referred to the fact that land designated for housing for people of rural Barbados, poor people in the constituency of St. Andrew, later on found itself in the position of a commercial sector, and a restaurant was built. I have no problem with a restaurant. I am not here to present a brief for anybody except for the people of Barbados, and sometimes that includes the business element as well, the business community as well. All I'm saying here, to be illustrative, is that sometimes people have information which others may not be privy to, and it gives them a significant advantage. They get a head start. And that when that happens, it's a form of insider trading, inside information. It's a form of corruption. Now, government has on its cards the development of some housing projects coming down. And I have asked already for some clarity with respect to these things. And the same question will arise with reference to that. If private sector is involved in these planned government housing projects, those who are awarded the contracts or have been already awarded contracts, I would want to know if there was any information given to them up front so that they can fast track their claims for contracts. Now, have me shot if you want, but I'll ask those questions. I will ask those questions because I believe it is part of the function of this office and of this parliament, and on this side, for those of us to ask and to raise those questions. Now, I wonder too, Mr. Speaker, about our capacity or incapacity to measure the cost to the Barbados economy of corruption. The Honourable Member for St. Peter made reference to this point. There is a cost attaching to corruption. And in our context of scarce resources, in our context of weak earnings capacity, in our context of an over-reliance on borrowing, both at home and abroad, we talk about loss in terms of foreign exchange leakage, but there's a cost attaching to some of the contractual arrangements we get into, especially those which are characterized by some measure of corruption, contract costs, and the cost of supplies. These things cost small nations such as we. And the money has to come from somewhere when it is lost to corruption, and it's coming from the pockets of taxpayers. It is coming from the hard labors of Barbadians. Corruption is an ugly thing. Whatever form it takes, it has to be rooted out, and we have to be able to measure the cost to us of corruption. I thought I read some time ago, if you look at bribery alone globally, $2 to $3 trillion, a significant percentage of global output. And that's only bribery, Mr. Speaker. That's only bribery. One wonders the level of which it obtains in Barbados and what is the percentage of the our economic output that can be seen in the light of the level of corruption, whether it is bribery. So our incapacity to measure is something that we have to be able to address. I say that humbly. Barbados is a small state, small developing state. The profile of our economy is a mixed economy, but it's a mixed economy context in which the state is a substantial player, especially right now in this COVID context. A lot of the business which is happening about, much of the business which is happening about is now being driven by government coffers, whether we borrow or find some of the means of generating it. But the state is having to employ a lot of people, and I don't want to say just for the sake of employing them, just for the sake that the people can have some economic activity and endeavor that can ease their pain and bring some revenue to their households, because it's a very sad situation. I pass these days, I see every day people on the roads doing bush and doing clearing. I understand there was 700 of those jobs, Mr. Speaker. You were my political neighbor, and I hope you got, because I didn't get any. And if anybody in St. Michael West got, they didn't get through me. And I am the people's representative for St. Michael West, and if taxpayers' money being spent down there, then the person who officially represents St. Michael West should benefit from the privilege of being able to facilitate some of his constituents. I am happy for those who may have had jobs, I don't know, but they may have gotten them through the assistance of someone else who is better favored by the administration than I am at this moment. But 700 jobs, said to be 700, but it looked to me like 7,000. But however many there are, you could have at least, I am sure if the Honourable Member for St. James North were in charge, he would have ensured that I got a few of those jobs. Same for the Honourable Member of St. James Central and St. James South, and on all other members, except perhaps the one who now presides, and I don't know why that would be. He's a good friend of mine. But not a single one of them 7,000 or 700 or 1,700 or however many. Not one, not a fella. And I was saying this to somebody, and everybody said, no, that ain't true. I see some of them working on Barbries Hill. And Barbries Hill is in St. Michael West. Yeah, I see them working on Barbries Hill. I see them working in Waterford Bottom. I see them working all around the place. But you see, you can bring fellas out of St. Thomas and put them to work in Barbries Hill. And I'm sure if the honorable member St. Thomas got to realize that poor Joe didn't get any, she would say, no, 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 cannot happen, because she is not that unjustly disposed. But the fact of the matter is, so the state has to play a role, and a significant role in economic development, economic activity, and especially capital development. And this government is giving a lot of attention to that. But that being the case, then it exposes the country, the government, the economy to corruption as well. So the fact that the state has to play, you think of things like public-private sector partnerships, and I've heard voices castigating the last administration. And there's still a lot of questions being raised, read the last administration, on contracts and public-private sector partnerships, and the issue of corruption being attached to the performance of that administration by many voices in here and some outside. And the reality is, whatever administration leads the country at the time, the role of the state, the entrepreneurial role of the state in our mixed economy context, such that we are prime participants, and especially now, exposes the country and the economy and the political operatives and private sector world to aspects of corruption. And those are concerns that we have to have. Mr. Speaker, we've been operating since 2010, a context where wages, salaries in the public sector have been depressed. I know this administration gave a 5% increase in public sector wage rolls a couple years ago, but in a context where they gave 5% and took back probably 25%. So wages, salaries, public sector people continue to be depressed. Sometimes the private sector borrows from that, so that same level of economic, financial depression, income depression would obtain in the private sector. Now, so we have depressed wages in a context where cost of living, imported inflation, cost of living as a result of taxation or tax increases in Barbados have created a certain scenario. Simply put, the money you're earning for the job you hard do every day isn't going anywhere, and the money you have to pay to survive for cost of living needs, necessities, and in order to meet your tax obligations to the state or to the government, going in a contrary, counter direction. Mr. Speaker, the kind of tension being introduced there can be summed up sometimes in one phrase: potential for corruption. Because the guy who works in a pivotal position in one of the, let's say the tax revenue entities of the government can find himself, so a lady can find herself faced with a situation where bills still have to be met, wages are not going anywhere, cost of living going up, taxes going up, things were always tight, now it's a total squeeze, I can't breathe financially. So the creation of the potential for corruption is there. Whether it's police you're dealing with, customs you're dealing with, immigration you're dealing with, licensing authority you're dealing with, any of the other revenue collecting agencies of government. Sometimes it is the political principles. Whatever it is, Mr. Speaker, competition is rife in the business sector, the commercial sector, competition is rife. So if I'm to get ahead of the fella yonder, then I have to pay what I have to pay to whomsoever I have to pay, so that I might get up front in this line, so to speak. Mr. Speaker, those are things that create the greater context for corruption. And when we put legislation in place, though we be lauded for it, we still have to be careful as to how those things are addressed. Because remember what Sir David Simmons, that of which he reminded us when I started, and that is the architecture may be there, and we may put that with all good intentions in place, but it is the principles, the people within the system and the integrity attaching to them that creates a concern for us. We don't want to have our institutional integrity called into question, because that's where cynicism is birthed. And our democracy is only as strong and as sound and as positively functional as our institutions have credibility. Whether it's the judicial institutions, the economic institutions, political institutions. It's only when there's a certain measure of integrity attaching to these things that cynicism can be warded off, and the people have confidence in the institutions. And therefore, I think what we're seeking to do by creation of this entity is to make sure that we have institutions which are credible, highly functional, and are sealed off from political interference or any other forms of corruption. We need to see, because it's continuing to be a bugbear, where statutory corporations and others, notwithstanding the passage of recent legislation in this place, ensure that these institutions fall in line with their obligations with respect to presenting financial reports and audited financial reports. And it does not continue to be a good thing that institutions like the National Insurance fall outside of the ambit of that expectation. And there are other institutions for many years who do not forward properly audited financial reports. And if we continue in that way, the legislation may exist on paper, but in fact takes us nowhere, and takes us nowhere in a hurry. I would not want to trouble the chamber any further. I think I've made some references to the pertinent points which I wanted to make, and the Attorney General assures us that not long from now, we're having other opportunities to talk on the business of corruption. And of course, I will need to have something to say then. So I will reserve that further opinion. For now, Mr. Speaker, I give way.
Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, in what will be a relatively brief intervention, I want to just begin by reflecting for a moment on an observation which was made by a couple of speakers today with respect to the fact that this matter of corruption is all too often cast in the light of being a set of offenses committed by persons holding public office. And I begin here, sir, because I really want to try to help those within earshot of my voice, or those who may come across this speech somewhere in Hansard several years from now, to understand that there has for a long time been an understanding that this matter of corruption is one in which the whole society, the whole of the society must take an interest, because in fact, Mr. Speaker, sir, the whole of the society is impacted, and the whole of the society, quite frankly, sir, creates the framework within which it takes place. It was a former Prime Minister of Barbados, and no less than the right excellent Errol Walton Barrow, who would have made the point, sir, that he that giveth is as guilty as he that receiveth. And he made that point in reference to the 1929 Prevention of Corruption Act, which is the piece of legislation, as I believe the learned Attorney General has already pointed us to, that governs this matter today. And that perhaps, sir, is a very critical observation, because we are now 91 plus years since that piece of legislation passed this place. And you will recall as well as I do, sir, that it was a matter that was not only laughable, but we in Barbados, not in the Barbados Labour Party, but we in the island of Barbados laughed to scorn a successor prime minister who led the last regime, who asked this country to accept and swallow the view that there was satisfactory legislation in Barbados to deal with issues of corruption, which obviously was a response to the rampant concerns of the time during his period as prime minister. And he would have asked us to accept that the 1929 Prevention of Corruption Act was all that we should have to rely upon, notwithstanding its obviously low fines, short terms of imprisonment, and a completely antiquated way of treating to this issue. Now, we've obviously come a long way since then, sir, but I begin on this point because it is entirely important for us to understand that it is all too glib, all too easy, perhaps too trite, for someone to stand on a street corner and point to a public official. That person need not even be a politician, even though, sir, we tend to take the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune more than anybody else. But any holder of public office can be accused, but that person cannot, by him or herself, be corrupted. There has to be a corrupting co-party. Somebody got to pay, somebody got to make the offer, etc., etc. And very often, sir, that person or those entities are located in the private sector, and they have their own interests that they wish to pursue. And I begin there, sir, because that perhaps was the most useful observation that came out of the speech of the leader of the opposition just now. I thought, sir, that his speech, he did himself something of a disservice, in my view, sir, by taking us into these matters of 700 jobs or 7,000 jobs and crying, or 17,000, whatever the figure was, and using this serious opportunity to make a clamor for political patronage that was beneath the office of leader on a matter,
Honorable Member Mr. Michael West.
The honorable member for St. James Central is misleading the chamber, Mr. Speaker, or he is himself misled. If it is his view that my role here when I stand to my feet is not to represent principally the interests of the people of St. Michael West, and then in a wider context, people of Barbados. That is my role here. I trust it is his. I trust it is his. So when I say you give 700 jobs in St. Michael West, and you forget Joe, I am not talking about Joe. I am talking to the people of St. Michael West who sent me here to represent them. I would hope that if it happened to the honorable member of St. James Central, he would get up and do the same thing, and if he did, he would find my support.
I find no point of order. Continue, honorable member.
Thank you, sir. And sir, it would be true to say that even if the people from his constituency got the jobs, then there should be gratitude that they got the jobs. That they get the jobs through Joe or Tom, Dick or Harry is really irrelevant. It is important that the people get the work. But that is to digress, sir. And I don't want to accept the invitation to digress. We have, Mr. Speaker, sir, a very serious piece of legislation which is before this House. The bill generally addresses the feature of corruption in society, and it generally addresses the feature of corruption in public life. More specifically, sir, it establishes an agency whose time, which is an idea, whose time has come. It is an agency that will have sufficient operational independence and autonomy to do the type of investigative work that is necessary in a country and in a region which is beginning to be tormented by a number of very serious crimes and, in fact, atrocities which we as a society and we as a region have to take very seriously. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, some of these modern challenges that are facing us cannot just be brushed aside, and they have to be given the full glare and amplification of public scrutiny. And it is an important thing for a government to put itself in a position to be able to respond seriously and sensibly to these challenges. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, what has the Attorney General brought to this House today? He is bringing a piece of legislation that more specifically, as I said, establishes an agency that we got to spend a little bit of time talking about, not only because of the fact that it seeks to set up a mechanism for doing certain types of work and investigation, but even more importantly, we have to talk about it because we have now to set aside the mischief of people believing that this agency is not, or is perhaps not satisfactorily, or is perhaps not sufficiently operationally independent, and is perhaps not blessed with the institutional credibility and institutional integrity that we would want it to have. And why do I say these things, sir? Because those were the words that were just used by he who spoke prior to me. And it is important, sir, that we don't allow these things to confuse the minds of listeners or of subsequent readers, Mr. Speaker, sir. The region that we live in understands now, in a way that was not thought of in 1950 or in 1960, the concern, Mr. Speaker, sir, of growing and increasing cases of child pornography. It understands, Mr. Speaker, in a way that was not understood in the 1950s and 60s, sir, narcotic trafficking and the consequences of that. It understands in a way, Mr. Speaker, sir, that was not understood the consequences, sir, of automatic firearms finding themselves within our borders. None are manufactured here, but they are here, Mr. Speaker, sir. And they are a plague on our society and a plague on this region. The region, Mr. Speaker, sir, as does Barbados, understand, sir, the connection between those things and offenses against the person, whether those offenses be murder or rape or whatever else. And Mr. Speaker, sir, they understand, sir, the connection between those types of firearms and terrorism. And even if we didn't understand it, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are a literate population. We understand that just across the pond in countries in Latin America, I don't have to name them, sir, neighbors in Latin America, within this hemisphere, about right away, we have all heard of the cartels. We have all heard, sir, of the narco traffickers. We have all heard, sir, of the massive movements of firearms. We read, Mr. Speaker, sir, of the impact of organizations which have sprung up seemingly overnight, and the way in which in some parts of the developing world, they have seized people's girl children and hold them to ransom. It is an impossibility, sir, for any serious small economy not to look at these things and reflect on the reality that those plagues can one day too visit our shores. And worse yet, turn a blind eye to the reality that in some regard and in some cases, those plagues have already visited our shores. And that is the reason why this government has to put itself in a position to be able to respond in a serious way and in an independent way to the fact that some of these issues are already a bugbear in Barbados. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the bill before the House has enshrined within it the provisions for operational autonomy that the Leader of the Opposition questions, and it makes those provisions very clear. They begin, Mr. Speaker, sir, by making reference to how the committee on the Office of the Director General will be funded. And as the Leader of the Opposition quite rightly points out to us, it will be done via the standard route of the Parliament of this country. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, it goes beyond that. And the concern I have with the speech of the Leader of the Opposition is that he must not allow people to interpret him as suggesting that we have not, or this bill has not, modeled as it is on the Jamaican legislation, which is a lived reality in Jamaica, has not gone far enough in order to ensure that we have properly protected the office and properly protected the institution that we are creating. Mr. Speaker, sir, what has happened? We are talking about a Director General that cannot be removed easily. He is no operating subsidiary of anybody, sir. To remove the Director General, you would have to be able to establish a number of things, one of which is that he has a mental health disorder. So it ain't that you can follow up with the political class of the day or the government of the day, you just disappear. You have to be able to establish the man got a mental health disorder, sir, or that he is a bankrupt, Mr. Speaker, sir, or that he has been convicted of an offense involving dishonesty. Not that he and the Attorney General don't get along, or that he and the Prime Minister had a noise or a row, but you have to be able to establish, Mr. Speaker, sir, that he has been proven to have brought disrepute to the agency that he leads as a result of dishonest practices that he's involved himself in, sir. This is not a nay-nay, willy-nilly thing where, by virtue of some whim or fancy of the political elite, that you can remove a person with whom you have taken displeasure. That's the first thing that we have to settle. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, sir, that needed to have been addressed if we were going to have a serious and a sensible and a mature discussion on this matter, sir, would have been that the legislation is making provision for a major anti-corruption oversight committee. So it is not that you will have a Director General, one-man band in charge of everything, but he works, sir, in conjunction with an oversight committee. And it is incredibly important, sir, to understand that even as we hear in this House about the need for integrity and credibility, that committee, by virtue of this proposed piece of legislation that I'm holding in my hand here, Mr. Speaker, sir, that committee is to be appointed by Her Excellency, the Governor General of Barbados, upon the advice of the Prime Minister of Barbados, after consultation, sir, with the leader of the opposition. Now, for the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, sir, in any country, to seek to poo-poo or to make light of the institutional integrity or the institutional credibility of a process that appoints its members by virtue of the appointment of the head of state on the advice of the elected leader of the state after consultation with the leader of the opposition himself, sir, is a shameful thing. And I'm sure that when the leader of the opposition reflects on this speech of his today, sometime tonight, he himself would cry shame on the leader of the opposition for making such types of references about a process that involves his office, Mr. Speaker, sir. And it goes further. It goes further. The committee itself, if you want to have a conversation with this nation about institutional integrity, then you got to speak about how is the committee constituted? Are there yard fowls of the Barbados Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, sir? Are there nay supporters that we rake up and scrape up and say, look, come and sit down on a committee? Is it built out on political patronage that you canvass for me, so therefore you give a little pick? Mr. Speaker, sir, there's none of that. The committee is comprised of the following: a retired judge, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is to be comprised of an assistant commissioner of police or an officer retired at the police force of higher rank than assistant commissioner. You're listening to what we just heard, sir, you wouldn't have thought that that's how the committee is comprised. It is to be comprised, sir, of a retired colonel of the Barbados Defense Force or officer of higher rank, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is to be comprised, sir, of a minister of religion, Mr. Speaker. It is to be comprised of persons who have they have three choices: expertise in finance, expertise in public procurement. No, Mr. Speaker, I won't pause here on the question of public procurement. Because if we're going to seriously have this type of conversation in Barbados, then let us understand the challenges that we have in Barbados genuinely. And this is not a partisan thing. And therefore, it is unfortunate that it began to take on that color. There are some times when the leader of the opposition speaks that he must remember that he is seen by some, as by virtue of his office, as a prime minister in waiting. And that may surprise him, but that's a fact. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to understand that when we're talking about public procurement in Barbados, we're talking about an area of economic activity which has presented real problems for this country from time immemorial. The small businessman who goes into a contract, sir, must have a sense of certainty that he has equality of treatment in applying to the government for the contractual opportunity, as does the big businessman who may have more financial reach than he does. It is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we have for all time since independence had successive governments in here debating this issue over and over again, and it has been an ongoing debate. And perhaps, sir, today is the first day that we can actually see a mark in the sand. Because even though this is not a public procurement bill, it speaks to the question of how we begin to treat seriously and tangibly to how we deal with public procurement. How do you guarantee fairness and equality of opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir? And it may surprise you to know that in places like Europe, they have actually evolved the public procurement process to the point where when I tender for something, I tender for a contract, and I don't get the contract, and I feel that I get unfair, then I got a right to appeal. I got a right for you to say to you, but Skipper, you didn't give me the contract. Explain to me why I didn't get this contract. Where did I go wrong? Help me to understand how I failed, so that it can't be an arbitrary or discretionary thing done behind closed doors, but that it is an opportunity to empower myself, so I know that I didn't get this contract because my bid failed in the following material particular ways. I didn't do A, I didn't do B, I didn't do C. And as a result of that, the next time around, I know what I've got to do if I'm going to stand a chance. That's how you build people up, sir. And that is the conversation that where I sit in, where the leader of the opposition now sits, I would want to have with this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important also to note that there is a structure when we talk about institutional integrity and institutional credibility, sir. Let us also be fair to the process. This bill comes with a structure for making complaints. It comes with a structure for investigation. It enshrines those people who are going to do with the investigation, sir, with certain powers and having certain privileges. And those are, again, not willy-nilly privileges and powers pulled from the sky, made up on the fly by the Attorney General because he wants to fix this thing in a certain way. But they are enshrined with the powers, sir, that exist in the Commission of Inquiry Act. And why? Because we all know that when this country holds a Commission of Inquiry, sir, you treat it to a serious manner in a quasi-judicial way, in a formal setting, which is open to the public, which is transparent in process, Mr. Speaker, sir, which is independent, sir, of the government of the day. It is not influenced by political actors. It is not influenced by political operatives, Mr. Speaker, sir. And recommendations can come from the commission, or in this case, sir, the committee. Similar to the structure to the Commission of Inquiry, recommendations can come and go directly, not to the Prime Minister, not to the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, sir, not to the Minister responsible for legal affairs, but, sir, to the Director of Public Prosecutions. And if it is that a man is deemed after the independent investigation by these people, sir, these people, unless you forget, Mr. Speaker, sir, a retired judge, a commissioner of police that retired, a colonel of the defense force that retired, a minister of government that retired, a man who has some specialty skills in public procurement, Mr. Speaker, sir, a man or woman with specialty skills in finance, when they have sat down and done their deliberations, sir, and they feel that there's an act of negligence involved or a breach of duty of any official, public sector or private sector, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, they make the appropriate recommendations. So that I can think of nothing, Mr. Speaker, sir. I can think of nothing that would render this process more transparent and more independent of political influence. You've removed the public, you've removed the politician, you've removed the governmental actor from the process entirely. And you allow it to take its place, sir, having removed it, a gap is created, and you fill that gap, sir, by an independent, transparent process, free of political interference, free of political taint. And therefore, sir, having broken that new ground, it is not, I think, appropriate for us to be treated to a speech by the alternative leader of the land, which takes us way back to if he were in this parliament, sir, debating the 1929 Act, talking about what could happen by political interference and whether there can be institutional credibility or institutional integrity. I invite the leader of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, sir, to tell me where in any arrangement that he could think of in this country, you have brought that level of independence, that level of transparency, that level of broad public involvement to investigation processes. And that is the point, Mr. Speaker. So that we are breaking once again as a government new ground. We are once again as a government, sir, seeking to empower this society in a way that it was not previously empowered. And I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that in all fairness, the choice of using the Jamaica legislation is an excellent one, because I don't know of any other in the region which could be modeled upon. And I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it is a good thing that has happened in this place today with regard to that. And I want, sir, to just remind this House, the leader of Barbados, as he then was, the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, understood well that when he said, you know, he that giveth is as guilty as he that receiveth. He understood, sir, that if you're going to have a conversation about corruption, you're going to have a holistic conversation. You're going to have a conversation that embraces the reality that it is not about joking at the government. It is not about just joking at the government. It is not about just pelting stones at people who hold public office. It is, Mr. Speaker, sir, understanding that there is at the core of this country, as indeed at the core of several other countries, a practice which allows people at the lowest level and up to the highest level to believe that you can beat the system or you can massage the system by spending a little money, by offering a drink, by doing something in order to get a little something back for you. And that, as the leader of the opposition said, and I agree up to that point, that however small or however high you go, once it is that you're having that give and take in the process, and it is not something that is done on the basis of merit, then, sir, you are corrupting the system. But, sir, if we are going to correct it, then we have to correct it in a serious way, and as I say, sir, in a mature way, which allows us to understand that the private sector has to be taken on board in this journey. The private sector, sir, has to be brought to the table in an effort for them to understand that it is as wrong to approach somebody who is in a decision-making position and say, if you do this for me, I will give that to you. And there has to be a penalty attached to that. And it may surprise you, Mr. Speaker, sir, to know that there are parts of the world where, in fact, that is how the legislation now goes. So that the person who makes the approach to the public official also faces a penalty and a sanction in law. Mr. Speaker, sir, whatever we decide to settle on as we go forward, because this constantly evolves. It's not that you come and debate this today, you pass the law, and there's an end to corruption. It constantly evolves. There's been corruption around for as long as there's been man. And there will be a need to police it for as long as there will be man, because that is the nature of mankind. And Mr. Speaker, sir, therefore, it is important for us to have a holistic conversation with the state so that everybody understands the role that they can play. If I were to go on, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would say to you that by creating this committee and bringing independent people to bear on the investigation, Mr. Speaker, you now are empowering another set of individuals who may want to be whistleblowers, who may feel uncomfortable coming to complain about one public official because that public official is associated with one political institution and they don't know when the institution and government can change, so therefore they prefer to wash their hands of the matter. So they sit down home quiet, but deep inside they agonize that they have information. They know who it is that approached who. They know who it is that went to pay money to who. They know who it is that took the money. But they ain't want to say nothing because I might get squeezed. I might lose my little pick. But by creating an open, independent framework, Mr. Speaker, sir, they feel now empowered to come forward. And Mr. Speaker, that is how the country is expected to evolve. So I say all of that, sir, simply to say this. I think that we have an excellent piece of legislation at our fingertips. I think it is carrying us in the direction it needs to take us. And I wish, sir, that it had been given the level of seriousness in terms of treatment that it deserves from the other side of this House. I am obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my voice to the discussion surrounding the anti-corruption and anti-terrorism bills. First, Mr. Speaker, allow me to express my congratulations to the Attorney General. I do not think that anyone who heard the initial presentation by the Attorney General this morning can be left in any doubt as to what the bill is about, the scope and reach of the bill, the protections in place, what is involved in setting up of the committee. It was perhaps the most thorough and yet interesting presentation of a bill that I've heard to date, sir. So I wish to totally commend the Attorney General for that. Having said that, sir, we are in the unenviable position in Barbados of our name in recent years being linked with corruption and corrupt practices and corrupt public officials in a way that it never was before. Barbados was that country that held its head high among the other countries in the Caribbean, where bribery and corruption of public officials was something that was almost taken for granted. It was par for the course. I remember, sir, in the early days, I was in Guyana, sir, and we were going along the highway coming from the airport heading into Georgetown, and a siren came on, and the person who was driving me pulled over their car, and they went into their pocket and they put a couple of bills on their license and passed it to the officer who stopped them, who looked at the license, passed back the license and said, please proceed. And having come from Barbados, sir, I didn't have a clue as to what that was all about. I didn't understand what went on there. And I'm like, what you stop you for? He said, that's a taxation point. I said, what do you mean by that? What did he pull you over for? And the person was almost embarrassed. He said, you're from Barbados, you wouldn't understand. for what that was, sir, and everybody accepts it's a hazard, that if you don't pass over your license 45 with something under it, then the officer would find a reason to charge you. Speeding, failing to stop, something, sir, that you'll be almost powerless to defend yourself on. But that was a way of life, sir, in Guyana. So a similar thing used to happen in Jamaica. And we have all these anecdotal stories, and the persons from those territories used to make the jokes about it. People were not even ashamed. That was a cost of traveling. That was a cost of existing in some of our brother and sister countries. Most of that, sir, to a large extent has stopped. But we in Barbados started to be painted with the same brush in the last couple of years. I've heard people talk about, in here today, about corruption and the cost of corruption. But it is not even simply the economic cost, sir. Long lines encourage corruption. Inefficiencies in our systems encourage corruption. If there is something to be gained by finding a short path for someone, then there is no incentive for the public official or for those in charge of the system to ensure efficiencies in the system. Efficiencies cut down on the ability to make money by helping people to find an efficient path. Sir, we have these built-in, almost systemic inefficiencies in our system that we need to stop. Because it is not simply somebody who tells a public official, or a public official tells somebody, listen, you can get this contract for $1 million, but send it in for 1.5. You take yours, and we're all happy. It is not just that. That is the overt corruption, sir. That is the overt cost to the taxpayer. But every single time, sir, I go down to the Barbados Licensing Authority and I have to stand up in a line, that costs me and it costs everybody else behind me in that line. Every time there is a permit to be granted, where the rationale for granting the permit is uncertain, sir, that costs me, who is entitled to get that permit, and it costs other people who are entitled to get that permit, where somebody else gets it who is less entitled than we are or applied after us. This is a true story, sir. A friend of mine had gone to take the driving test and failed 3 times. On the 4th time, he decided not to leave it to chance. And he went in to take his driving license and determined he was coming out with a license, and he did. And 2 days later, sir, he bought a vehicle. It was a Suzuki Swift. I remember it clearly. A gunmetal gray Suzuki Swift. And he came to show it to us and collided with the gate coming into Harrison College. And we all had a good laugh, sir, because he could not drive. He probably still can't drive up to now. But the point is, instead of being that gate, that could have been another human being. Or that could have been another vehicle. But because the avenue was there, and you know, we say that it's not just the person who's paying, it's also the person who's receiving. But from the time the mechanisms of state and the perception of our system start to fail us, there is a hard road to come back from there. When I was a child, I remember really clearly, sir, I was coming up to my CXC, so before my A-levels. And my mother, a devout Christian lady, came in for one of those heart-to-heart, mother-to-son conversations, and she said to me, son, there are 2 things that will break my heart. If you ever became a lawyer, or you ever became a politician. Find something else to do. I think, sir, that she had come up on the wrong end of a politician who was a lawyer. And I remember, sir, when I after A-levels and I applied to UE, and I had to advise my poor mother, Mom, I know you once said to me, you don't want me to be a lawyer politician, but I gotta break your heart, Mom. I've decided to do law. She said, well, it could be worse. So, sir, imagine 10 years ago, when I had to break my mother's poor heart again and say I was going for the nomination for Christchurch East. But the point of this, sir, is that politicians and public service persons who should actually be in an honorable position, occupation or profession are now painted with a brush that everybody assumes that all politicians are corrupt. Everybody approaching a government office for a license or for a grant or for some permission or permit believes that there is a way around the system. So it is not only, sir, to protect the individuals in the system that this legislation is critical and essential, but sir, it is also to protect the perception of the system itself. Unless we claw our system back, unless we put in safeguards that make sure people get what they deserve, let the person who is best able to carry out the contract get the contract. Let the person who's best able to do the job get the job. Let a man in the system be paid fairly for what it is that he does do. These are the things that we have to build in, sir, to all of our systems in government. And quite frankly, I believe, sir, that we have made a good start. The other thing, as I look at this legislation, it's hard, sir, you as an attorney who practices criminal law, I was about to say a criminal attorney, but that would be just again to carry that joke.
That'd be very wrong to say that.
It would be, sir. You as an attorney who practices law in the criminal courts of Barbados, sir, know full well that it is not only what is done, but is also what is perceived to be done that often counts. Sir, this legislation, we've spoken a lot on the anti-corruption aspect of this legislation, but this legislation goes even further. This legislation also deals with anti-terrorism and the anti-terrorism aspect. As one honorable member before addressed that we keep coming up against more and more particulars for us to be able to do business. Sir, when you go to open a bank account, it is more difficult, sir, to open a bank account than it is to get a university degree. It is, sir. I, in my latter days as a lawyer, went to open an account for an estate. I try to not complicate matters. If I'm doing an estate, I open an account for that estate, put all the money for that estate into there, so there's no difficulty in accounting afterwards. I went to open an account for an estate. And the person at the bank that I do business with, where he had 7 or 8 accounts before, including other estate accounts, wanted 2 pieces of ID. I said, but I don't have 2 pieces of ID on me. Right? Can you not just open it with my Barbados driver's license? No. I need to bring in 2 pieces of ID, a job letter, I'm self-employed, and proof of address. I said, but you have 7 accounts with me. If I came to cash a check now, you would give me the money because you know who I am. They said, this is not us. This is what our head office asks us for. This is what the international agency list of us have. So when we don't have the prosecutions to back up what it is that we say we are doing internally, then it looks like we don't have either the enforcement, that our judicial system is corrupt, or we don't have the legislation in place, as opposed to it being that we simply don't have the scale and magnitude of A, corruption, or B, terrorism activities that you do have. The only thing that we can do, sir, is to put all of our ducks in a row, prove that we actually do have the legislative framework, and we do have the enforcement procedures, and the failure to secure convictions is not based on a lack of the legislation or enforcement procedures or regimes, but simply is based on the fact that we do not have it to the scale at which prosecutions can occur and be successfully completed. So, terrorism, sir, is not, or to be guilty of a terrorist act, it is not that you have to be the person who straps on the bomb. It is not that you have to be the person that goes and blows up the building. It is also, sir, if you are one of the people who sends money or helps to finance somebody who's involved in terrorism, or somebody you believe to be involved in terrorism, or somebody who is a sympathizer or an empathizer to a terrorist cell or other terrorist organizations. So you can't be making donations all across the globe anymore willy-nilly. You need to be careful what it is that you do with your money. You need to be careful where it is you send your money, because they're going to trace the donations that you make. A lot of terrorist activities used to be hidden behind charities. A lot of terrorist activities used to be hidden behind anonymous donations. So this piece of legislation is not just simply to catch or prosecute corrupt practices within the public service. This piece of legislation is also to give us the tooth and the resources to trace terrorist transactions or donations to terrorist activities or things that fall under the terrorism bracket. Sir, it is, we as lawyers know that whole know your client requirements that came in that made life real difficult. Some of the questions, sir, that lawyers, accountants, other people are required to ask their clients, the bulk of people don't do it. It is almost bordering on ridiculous. But this is the standard that is expected of us. And you are good skating that and not asking the questions only up to the point in time when nobody that you know or does business with runs afoul of the law. Because from the time that person does run afoul of the law, everything starts to trace backwards. And if it lands or points to your account or a payment made to you or a donation made to you, then you could end up being almost as guilty as that person in the eyes of the law and international organizations. So, sir, this now allows us to do that back checking. This allows us to unravel those very, very complex financial structures and complex corporate structures to actually see who is the ultimate beneficiary of a transaction or a benefit. It allows us, sir, to look behind and trace money into the hands of persons who have been guilty of corrupt practices, and also trace money into those who are involved in terrorism. So as we discuss and as we wrap our minds around why it is essential for this piece of legislation to pass now, it is not simply, sir, to catch persons. It's not simply to penalize public officials. It's not simply, sir, to go after persons who served in government. It is also, sir, to clean our hands and to provide that framework so we are not one of those countries who's blacklisted because of terrorist connections, terrorist activities, perceived connections or activities, or even such a relaxed framework that those connections or activities can happen. The other thing as well, sir, why I commend the Attorney General, and I believe prior to this, there has been no great impetus to actually push anti-corruption legislation through, or whistleblower legislation, or that whole suite of legislation that opens that door to prosecution. There's been no great impetus to do it, because anybody passing or pushing this legislation starts by making themselves vulnerable first. There's a gray area, sir. In the law, a man cannot be guilty of an offense that was not an offense when he committed it. So if I pick up this pen, actually, let me try something else. This one doesn't belong to me. If I take out this pen, sir, I put it in my pocket, and there's nothing saying that I cannot take out that pen and put it in my pocket and ask who it belongs to. But a week down the line, a law is passed saying do not take up the pen and put it in your pocket unless you ask who it belongs to. I am guilty going forward. But the person who did it last week when it was not the law is not guilty.
I remember retroactivity.
Correct, sir. I'm trying to speak it for those who may be listening that might not understand where I'm coming from. So, in many instances, we are now setting the framework for what is to happen going forward, starting with ourselves first. There may be criminal acts, sir, that are not entirely covered by this, but of themselves stand as crimes. No. That other persons who served in public life before, other public officials should actually be wary of, because we can trace back. You now have the investigative capacity to investigate those things that, while there were crimes back then, the prosecution and investigation of them were difficult because of lack of resources, because of a dedicated framework, because in some instances, the police don't want to go after the big fish. People have always been afraid to go after persons in government. Because if I lay a charge against you, and that charge is not proved, then I become the subject of your ire and your victimization, and people were very afraid to do it. That is why, sir, with whistleblowers, nobody wants to come forward and say it was me. We all have heard stories of practices in Barbados. We have heard people saying, as a fact, this happened to me. I was asked to do X, Y, and Z to get A, B, and C. We've heard it. The problem is, you can't prosecute the person, the guilty party, without that evidence of a person coming forward and say, I am the IC witness. Somebody needs to come into a witness stand, put their hand on a Bible, swear an oath, and lead that evidence. And to date, we cannot find people who want to do it. People are willing to say, I know this as a fact, I will give you details, but I am not going into court to say anything for it. You have the police who say, well, we have heard this, we believe this, but you know, if John King don't want to go and stand up and get evidence against, let me be careful calling names, John Doe, then we wasting time. It can't go forward. We are now putting in place a system where, sorry, sir, can I have some water, please? Where, sir, we have the capacity, not the burden financial crimes unit, not the regular detectives in the police force, but we are now putting people, or have the ability to contract persons whose speciality is in tracing money, whose speciality is in investigating corruption, whose speciality is in finding the source. We are now putting that in place, sir, so there's no more excuses. Also, if we're in a position to contract people, you don't have to worry about victimization. If I am not a public officer investigating somebody in public or investigating a government minister, then I don't have to care. If I get my paycheck at the end of the day from PricewaterhouseCoopers, if my salary comes from Ernst & Young, if my salary comes from somebody overseas, if my salary comes from a firm in the United Kingdom, and my job is to investigate, I'm going to come here to Barbados and I'm going to investigate. They have them all over the world. It is a hazard of what it is that we do. All over the world, you have special investigatory commissions. You have people bringing in manpower, people bringing in resources to investigate complex or sensitive matters in your own country. Because in many instances, you know that it is not practical, it is not expedient, and it will not yield the results that you want if that investigation happens locally by locals. That's the reality. Thank you very much. That is the complete reality, sir. So, it was time. It was time, sir, for us to get to the point where we started to put our money where our mouth is. We came to government, sir, saying that we plan to root out corruption. We came to government saying that we intend to be the most transparent government that there ever was. We came to government saying that we will pass anti-corruption legislation. We came to government saying that going forward, from henceforth, Public officers and public officials must be held to a higher standard than happened before. We came to government saying that we cannot lose the lessons of the last decade, and that those lessons must inspire us for Barbados to never find itself in that position again. We came to government saying we want to claw back our place in the Caribbean, that place of respect where people look to Barbados as a shining example of what to do and how to do it. We came to government, sir, with Barbados on its knees. Barbados was never in the position that it found itself in on May the 24th, 2018. Never, sir. Our economy was broken. Our country was in shambles. The central bank was in potters. People had no faith. People had no hope. And people just wanted everybody who had their hands on government out and for a new dawn to happen. And that new dawn, sir, did happen. But with that new dawn came responsibilities to fulfill the promises that we made to get us there. That new dawn, sir, came with responsibilities to answer for the people who said to us, all is at you. We are giving you the full mandate, the cleanest slate. You go and turn our country around. Sir, and mercifully, Barbados has started to turn around. Barbados was experiencing economic growth. Sir, we were about to turn, well, not about to, we had started to turn that corner. And COVID hit. And it has been rough for Barbadians. It has been difficult for us as a government in this time. But the reality, I often say to myself, sir, is as rough as this is, I cannot even fathom what it would have been like had the last government still been in position. The Prime Minister, sir, even now that we deal with emergency situations, even now sometimes that the rules for procurement have to be expedited, the PM has made a point to those of us in cabinet, and she has said, in an emergency situation, follow the rules as best you can. When you spend, keep the receipts, because you're going to have to account for them. So although you may have to, in certain instances, abridge procurement, it is not a free-for-all. This is not the time for corruption. Although you may have to not jump through all of the hoops you did before, because sometimes decisions have to be made now. If Minister Bostic has to order vaccines, and some become available tomorrow, sir, then he has to get the vaccines tomorrow. He has to know the framework within which he's operating and be prepared to defend himself down the line that I made the best choice in the circumstances and my hands are clean. So, having read through this legislation, sir, I don't think that those whose heart is pure have anything to worry about, quite frankly. If you are here to do the people's business, and you are here to apply the rules, and you are here to be a good government, then you need not fear this anti-corruption legislation. It is not meant to catch you out. It is meant to prevent corrupt acts. You have to be able to explain. There's nothing unreasonable, sir, in asking you where that came from. Like, Mr. Speaker, your robe looks particularly fetching today. Are those real gold strings? How did you get that one? And you explain how you got the gold string robe. But the point is, once you can justify, and for all those who have dealt fairly, they are able to justify what it is that they do have, then there is nothing for us to be afraid of. And I keep telling people, you don't have to be worried about being caught when you get it wrong. Or, sir, you don't have to worry about being caught if you've done the right thing. Everything can be explained. Sir, I look at the Singapore model, and I believe that there are a lot of lessons that we could learn from Singapore. Singapore had a serious problem with corruption. A very, very, very big problem with corruption. You know what Singapore did? Singapore said, all right, here's what we're gonna do. You public officials, we are gonna revise your entire pay scale. All the public officials, all the PSs, all the whoever, all the ministers, all. We're gonna revise your pay scale. We are actually gonna look, carry out a study, what is a fair pay for you. And we are going to pay you not just fairly, but we're going to pay you well. However, if you are found guilty of corruption, if it is bribery, so for the person who is bribing, I think the fine starts at $100,000 and or 5 years in jail. But if you are the corrupt official, I think, sir, that fine, that penalty goes up to 10 years, just for the simple act of corruption. So they are dropping the hammer on the public officials, but making sure that across the board, the MPs, the cabinet ministers, the heads of the civil service, the PSs, the police, all in the public service have gone up. But also the punishments are certain. It is almost impossible to get away with corruption in Singapore, and the cost to you, if you are caught, is that ultimate deterrent. So I accept that we are not yet there. I accept that we have to look and find ways to equalize the pay in the civil service. I believe, sir, that our police need to be paid better. And I would like to think, sir, that when the government has additional resources, that we can start to make better payments and have a better evaluation of what the salary should be for those key persons in our society. Quite frankly, I think a police officer is in a very vulnerable position. Some of the police officers, sir, who go put their life on the line, they're not the best paid. You're having trouble paying for your car, you're having trouble paying your mortgage. When somebody offers you a break to look the other way, it is very easy to take that. I'm not justifying it, I'm actually being very real here, sir. So hand in hand with all of the legislative interventions that we are doing, we also have to look globally and holistically at our entire system. Look at the root causes for corruption. Look at what are the fertilizing activities for corruption. Look at where it blossoms. Look at what sectors are most subject to corruption. Look at the systemic inefficiencies that lead to corruption. And let us not just pass the legislation that allows for the investigation, but let us now start systematically to weed out the root causes and to crush the systems that encourage corruption. Sir, I am almost afraid, sir, when the Honorable Leader of the Opposition comes to me. But sir, we have made a good start and we will fulfill one of our promises. I am aware of what the Attorney General spoke about the rest of the suite of legislation that has to come. And sir, I am confident that by the time we have finished with the entire suite of legislation, Barbados will have that legislative and enforcement framework that will be the envy of the rest of the Caribbean and will allow us to position ourselves back where we want to be and to enjoy once again that reputation that we once had, but that we've lost over the last 10 years. So, all I say, sir, is I am very happy to be able to speak on this piece of legislation, this anti-corruption and anti-terrorism bill. It is indeed a step in the right direction. It will keep everyone from here on their toes. And I hope, sir, that the resources are there, that we can check backwards for where it still applies and to punish people who have brought this country to their knees. I'm not pointing at any one person or any one class of persons. I'm simply saying, sir, that Barbados suffered greatly. So where there is a chance for us to recoup some of what that suffering cost us, then almost even more than the imprisonment or the penalty factor, right, is the restoration. Because we lost a lot in suspect contracts. We lost a lot in, at its best, bad negotiation. At its worst, outright corruption. We have lost a lot, and a lot of that contributed to putting our country in the perilous financial state that it was in when we came in 2018. And so if there is a chance to get back any of that money, then I would like to think that we go after it full steam ahead with the resources that we do have. Because I don't want to enrich myself at the cost of Barbadians. And I don't want anybody to enrich themselves by a lash across my back. And the last 10 years, sir, hurt every single day, like the stripes across my back. So, I am happy to endorse this legislation, sir, and I look forward to the rest that will come to put us back where we actually need to be and to restore the confidence, not just in our country, sir, but in our systems, in our government, and in the policies that inform and made Barbados once the best country in the Caribbean. And with those few words, sir, I am much obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not in the fortunate position of the member who just spoke, in that I have only had sight of this legislation this morning. I would have loved to have been able to comment in detail with respect to certain aspects of this legislation, but I will be brief. I will probably have to do that at some future time, maybe when we get back to the integrity in public life legislation. But there are certain aspects of this bill which I'm very concerned. The question of transparency is one that we need to examine, and we need to look at more than anything else at this particular point in time. I believe that over 50% of us in this house would not have been in this house if we did not flag the issue of corruption in the manner in which we did in the last election. In that connection, Mr. Speaker, I find it difficult to understand how we could sort of cap terrorism with this piece of legislation. All the speakers who have spoken so far spoke to the issue of corruption. And maybe it would have been better to have had a separate bill dealing with the issue of terrorism, because nobody has spoken with respect to terrorism. Terrorism has not been an issue in this country at any time, even in the early days when the first Prime Minister was in office, when we had reason to bring in the Public Order Act. I don't think that terrorism was an issue. And I think that we should not have saddled this legislation with the question of terrorism. We should have had two separate pieces of legislation. It defies me why we have combined the two of these together. On the question of transparency, I listened to members who have been in support of this bill, and I'm in support of anything to alleviate corruption. I'm 100% in favor of. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that we operate in a way that, having had the moral authority, or having been given the moral authority to deal with the issue of corruption, that we do not let down those persons who have put us in a position to deal with corruption. And the issue of transparency has been flagged, and the question of transparency has been elaborated on in a manner which would tend to justify the composition of the committee in this regard. But I believe that the same factors which was called to mind at the time when we were dealing with the Electoral and Boundaries Commission of Barbados should have impacted on the composition of this committee. Now, I read from the Constitution of Barbados with respect to the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. The chairman, or rather the committee, shall consist of a chairman, a deputy chairman, and 3 other members. The chairman and 2 other members of the commission shall be appointed by the Governor General, acting on the recommendation of the Prime Minister after consultation with the Leader of the Opposition. You can't have it more transparent than that. The deputy chairman shall be appointed, and 1 other member shall be appointed by the Governor General, acting on the recommendation of the Leader of the Opposition. Can't have it more transparent than that. Now, this bill calls for the election of 7 members. 7 members. I heard honorable members speak with respect to the last administration and how they function in government. I remember having a consultation with the honorable member for St. Michael Northwest in the heat of the election, where he was concerned as to his success, his likelihood of success in this election. And those were the days when the issue of corruption was being mooted, not only on the political platforms, in the newspapers, all over the place. All over the place. And I remember telling him, you are the luckiest man in this election. Because when you're dealing with corruption, you have to understand that the person against whom you are running, at the time, the Minister of Finance, who we lambasted throughout the election, each and every member. I remember telling him, every single night, you're going to have at least 31 meetings and 31 people attacking the Leader of the Opposition. They attack the Minister of Finance. They attack the Minister of Finance more than they attack the Prime Minister. People forgot who the Prime Minister was during the last election. And we attacked day and night, left, right, and center, the Minister of Finance. And to a lesser extent, the Prime Minister. The Minister of Small Business, I shouldn't call names in this house, but the member who is now residing in the United States, not of his own accord, he wasn't even flagged during those days. And we have, listening to the debate here, we have spoken to the last government and their corrupt ways, their bad management, even in this debate. Now, what if this legislation should have been able to, in looking at this legislation and looking down the road, this legislation should have said something, or I'm not saying that it doesn't, as to what would change a situation which operated during the last 10 years, the area of the lost decade that the previous speaker just spoke about. So the point that I am trying to make is that in looking at the composition of this committee, it hasn't changed anything to correct that omission. Let us assume that this legislation was passed a few months before the last general election, 7 members of the committee was appointed by the Governor General on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. Leave the leader of the opposition out of it. The same Prime Minister who we attacked. The same Prime Minister who was responsible for the mismanagement of the government in the last election. And we would have been unable, as a government, having won 30 seats, we would have been able to change anything. So I'm saying that the composition of this committee doesn't go far enough. I think that if we are to have a committee that will be of some substance, that will actually stop us from looking at the lack of transparency, well then, it should be selected in a fairly transparent manner. And I think that the legislation which gives rise to the Electoral Boundaries Commission is a perfect start. I don't think that we necessarily needed to go to look at the Jamaican legislation. We have the Barbados experience with respect to a similar committee. And the question of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission did not come about at a time when there were a lot of instances of electoral fraud, as has happened in other countries in the Caribbean. But we were wise enough then to ensure that we put in place legislation that would stand the test of time. And I'm saying that in the same way that the commission, Electoral and Boundaries Commission, have been appointed in a manner that we could applaud even at this stage, that we have had the opportunity to deal with corruption, seeing what has happened, what we told the people of Barbados during the last election campaign, seeing what has happened with respect to that member of the last government who presently resides in the United States. We should make sure that we put legislation in place where we're going to have to ponder, who is this person? I don't want to call names. But we should be able to have legislation which any new government would be able to feel proud to make a nomination or to change in circumstances where that person might not be fitting to be selected on the actual commission. And I would even go a step further. I believe that those, in addition to following the lead from that legislation, I believe that we as parliamentarians should be given the opportunity of debating in this House the selection of those members or those recommendations to the Governor General. The question of appointments in some countries, in the United States, a good example. All the ministers, all the certain important officers, they come before the Senate, they come before the House of Representatives. They're presidents of the United States who have been disappointed because of their recommendations, not only in terms of ministers, but in terms of judges. And I believe that in this situation, seeing that corruption took a turn which caused us to make certain pointers in the last election, I think that we should have utilized the opportunity. I wasn't in here when the leader of the opposition spoke, but I believe that this committee, no one person should be allowed to appoint 7 members to this commission. Because when you look at what the last administration did, they extended their life, the life of the of Parliament. I mean, to the not the 11th hour, the 12th hour, and they could have appointed their friends. Let's say they had their friends appointed at the last hour, the Prime Minister. And you know, with consultation with the leader of the opposition, that could go through the back door. So you have 7 members. I don't like, as I said, I don't want to call names, but you could think of seven persons who you consider to be corrupt, who probably dealt with the last administration, and having those persons on a committee dealing with corruption, and then your hands are tied. You in a government with 30 seats. If that is repeated again, and you have the opportunity of making certain changes, but because of the composition of that committee, there isn't anything you can do. You're back to square one. And I would say that is one of the major failings of this legislation. It is good that members could have spoken in terms of this not being a party matter, and that we are all in this together, and that there's no need for us to feel that persons appointed will not be transparent. But we have to make sure that the process works for us. Another problem that I have with this legislation is the power of the minister, because you're appointing a committee, an important committee, and as I said, I put this committee at the same level because of what happened in the last 10 years as the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And you speak to the Director General being subject to the minister. He made the Director General, in many cases throughout this legislation, it speaks to the Director General performing his duties under the direction of the minister. That should not happen. The Director General should be like a Director of Public Prosecutions in some instance. The Director of the Public Prosecutions don't carry out his job under the direction of the Attorney General. And I think that this is a major failure of this legislation. The Director General should be able to operate within the confines of what is set out in the legislation, the functions. If anything, if you need to elaborate with respect to the functions, if you need with respect to the penalties and the behavior of the Director General to have further disciplinary guidelines, so be it, do that. You know, and then the question of the Oversight Committee. You're not only operating under within the confines of the minister, but then you have this Oversight Committee for what? An Oversight Committee to do what? To do what? I think the sections 34, 35, and section 5 deal adequately with respect to the functions of the committee. And if it becomes necessary, I think that if you need to elaborate on those particular issues, on his functions, well then, we should do that. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, I have only seen this legislation this morning, but I believe that as a government who just came into office with the confidence of the people of Barbados, people expect, there are many people who now 3 years into government expected that we would have been able to do something with corruption. We haven't done anything. But we are now dealing with the legislative framework in order to deal with these issues. But we have to be serious. We have to appear to be serious, and we have to make sure that what we put in this legislation will have some teeth. So that we don't want a situation where you appoint, the Prime Minister will come and appoint 7 persons to a committee, and then you have a new election. You have a new parliament with 30 members, 30 new members. I mean, and anything is possible. Anything is possible. If you see what happened in St. John from one election to the next, anything is possible. But then you are powerless because of the individuals. You have 7. I am not saying that it will happen. But I'm just saying that we have to make sure that we put the necessary legislation in place. So, as to give the public of Barbados the confidence that we are acting in their interests. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
I remember for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, let me thank all honorable members of this chamber for weighing in on this legislation. I can assure all honorable members that all of your contributions were valid, and in many instances, we had the opportunity in the preparation of the bill to be able to consider in advance some of these kinds of issues. The issue has been raised on both sides about the ability of the minister to give general directions on policy matters. This is standard, and it is a common thread across the entire panoply of agencies in our statutory bodies. It exists in every single piece of legislation. And while I understand that some people may be concerned, it is clear on any interpretation that ministers are not able to say specifically what to do or what not to do. They're able to give general directions on matters of policy. But that has to be construed in such a way as to make it clear that in terms of the day-to-day functioning of the entity, that it does not give an opportunity for instructions to be given. So, for example, Melvin and Andrew spoke about the Electoral and Boundaries Commission. That commission can be given policy directives. The Fair Trading Commission can also be given policy directives. As with this one, it doesn't denude their ability to function with the kind of independence you expect, but general policy directions are par for the course. It is a little reflected on fact that under Section 79A of the Constitution, the Attorney General can actually give specific directions to the DPP in a range of offenses. And that's in Section 79A of the Constitution. I don't hear anybody balking about that. But in that section, the AG can actually give the DPP specific directions in relation to prosecution matters. Mr. Speaker, this is an opportunity for us to take our policing of corruption issues to another level. I have pointed out the deficiencies in the system, the need for a stronger state apparatus to be able to deal with it, the importance of applying dedicated resources, the importance of having resources that are not easily diluted by virtue of other things that happen and that come up from time to time. I accept that there may be, and there obviously are some concerns about the legislation. I think, though, that our imperative is to get it up and running. There are many pieces of legislation that we review over a period of time. We've set up a law reform commission to actually look at the business of law reform. I don't anticipate that we're going to need to do any tinkering with this in the short term, but there's a lot of work to be done. We need the agency to get going, and should there be any glaring deficiencies, we will come back and deal with them if that time arises. But at this point in time, it is sufficient for me to say that I'm satisfied that the interests of the public are protected. The Oversight Committee is a critical body. I do not know of any other piece of legislation in Barbados where such an entity exists. It is an important role to play. In fact, a role that would far surpass even the role of an ombudsman, for example, who might be considered as a person to whom you could apply to look into any kind of governmental abuse. So, Mr. Speaker, I understand the fact that some members, for them, it may be a new item coming within their scope, but please let me assure all members that this legislation, well thought out. I anticipate that we have to now staff the agency once the legislation is passed and get it up and running. But the proof of the pudding in this case will no doubt be in the eating, and I therefore beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that this House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is now in committee.
Part 1, Clause 1.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that Part 1, Clause 1 be amended to change the year 2020 to the year 2021. So that the clause will not read this after the sake of the Anti-Corruption Act of 2021.
Question is that Part 1, Clause 1, with amendment stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 1, Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1, Part 2 stand part.
Part 1, Clause 2.
Part 1, Clause 2 stand part.
Question is that Part 1, Clause 2 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, Clauses 3 to 13.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, Clauses 3 to 13 stand part.
Question is that Part 2, Clauses 3 to 13 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, Clauses 14 to 23.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, being Clauses 14 to 23, stand part.
Question is that Part 3, Clauses 14 to 23 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, Clauses 24 to 32.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, being Clauses 24 to 32, stand part.
Question is that Part 4, Clauses 24 to 32 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, Clause 33.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Clause 33 stand part.
Question is that Part 5, Clause 33 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, Clauses 34 to 38.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, Clause 34 to 38 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, Clauses 34 to 38 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, Clauses 39 and 40.
Beg to move that Clauses 39 and 40 stand part.
Question is that Part 7, Clauses 39 and 40 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 41 to 43.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, being clauses 41 to 43, stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 41 to 43 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 9, clauses 44 to 49.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, being clauses 44 to 49, stand part.
The question is that Part 9, clauses 44 to 49 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
Question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
Question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg that you do not report to the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee with amendment.
Question is that I do not report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one bill with amendment in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of committees has reported the passing of one bill in committee with amendments. Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency Act 2021.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited.
Mr. Speaker, recommittal of government notices.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Appropriation Bill 2021. And the resolution. Mr. Speaker, I also beg to give notice of a resolution in two parts. A, that the House empowers the chairman of committees to designate the Committee Room of Parliament as the place where examination by the Standing Finance Committee of the head of the relevant ministry is to be conducted. And B, for the purpose of the examination of the estimates, that the member moving the particular head and speaking in reply be allowed to make that presentation virtually from the said committee room.
Recommittal of first readings of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Appropriation Bill of 2021 be read a first time.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Recommittal of government business, sir. In order number 4. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the House, to move the passing, of a resolution allowed to make that presentation virtually to the said committee.
Honorable Acting Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Chamber, this particular resolution arises as a result of the arrangements that we have made for the sitting of Parliament, in part virtually and in part by physical presence. You will well recollect that in our last two Standing Finance Committee debates on the estimates, the Honourable Minister who was moving the head and responding to the head had the benefit or the curse of being physically in the well of the chamber together with his senior officers so that Parliament can have a solid exchange, not just with the minister, but also with the officers who are charged with the responsibility of carrying out the day-to-day duties. Obviously, with the COVID protocols in play at this location, it would be imprudent, it would be wrong for us to have a large number of public servants gathering in this small area as the well. We would be betraying the people of Barbados who we have pledged to lead also by example. The arrangement that is being proposed and that this resolution attempts to capture is that the minister moving the head and his staff will be located in the committee room of Parliament at the opposite end of this floor. And in that committee room, Mr. Speaker, they would be established the facilities so as to enable those individuals, the minister and the staff, to participate virtually in the debate of Parliament, but in some still within the precincts of Parliament. And I think that that is a safe and wise compromise. The committee room of Parliament is very slightly smaller than this particular room, and we are satisfied after consulting with officials from the Ministry of Health that we can more than adequately deal with any physical distancing protocols in that place, and therefore Parliament is being asked to agree that those officers and the minister can participate from the committee room and still be participating fully and actively in Parliament in a virtual way. And specifically, that the member moving the particular head and speaking in reply be allowed to make that presentation virtually, but from the committee room. As I said, it arises as a natural consequence of the COVID restrictions. We hope that we don't have to labor under these restrictions for too long, but we believe that it would be wrong to turn back from what we were doing over the last 2 years. It would be wrong having established a regime of more transparency and accountability where public servants actually come and give account together with their minister. It would be wrong to move back away from that position. And this, we believe, is a fair and safe compromise so that the business of Parliament can be continued in the way that we want it to continue, while having due regard to the importance of adhering to COVID protocols and minimizing the risk of spread of COVID. Beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
The question is that this resolution do now pass. All the members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This resolution stands passed.
5 minutes coming. Beg to move that the House be suspended for 10 minutes, sir.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended for 10 minutes. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended for 10 minutes.